Well, this is William Hemphill. Thank you for joining us for today's Empowered Life video. We're still talking about identity formation, and today we want to talk about how God rebuilds broken identity. How God rebuilds broken identity. Um, I'd like to say this. I like to say for a long time, my faith might have been in the process of deconstruction and reconstruction. What I mean by that is, as I moved into ministry, started working in chaplaincy, sitting in beds by people suffering or seeing people suffering, people who were living and dying and struggling on the margins of life, it did something to me that made me want to not only know God in a more personal way, but question some things at times. I would sometimes look at theology and say, hey, that doesn't necessarily line up with what I'm seeing out here. Sometimes I would look at that and I would unlearn toxic messages, things like sitting by the bedside of people who caught diseases and they would be struggling, like because they were told they didn't have enough faith. And I would see how harmful statements like that were to people. And so, my work in ministry, my work with people in different areas of life kind of led me to a process of what I call deconstruction and reconstruction. And so I say that because I want you to realize something that this deconstruction alone does not give you a self. If they're not who, if I'm not who they said I was, who am I? In other words, who am I? What do I believe? And that's where the process of reconstruction begins. This is what happened to Moses at the burning bush. God didn't just call Moses, God was reforming him. I'd say reforming and recapturing because God recognized that leader who was there earlier in Egypt, who unfortunately committed murder and wanted to advocate for the Egyptians, but God had to reform him on the inside so he could be ready for the task that was ahead. Helpful identity formation is done with you for your flourishing. I want us to think about that. Helpful identity formation is done with you for your flourishing. Harmful and helpful formation both use the same material. We talked about this earlier. Mirror, message, memory, meaning, model, membership, and mastery. The difference is who controls them and what are they forming you for. In Exodus chapter 3, of course, God and Moses are having this encounter. And I like to say this before God delivers anyone, God says, I have seen, I have heard, and I know their suffering. In other words, God witnesses before God acts. God had seen the suffering of Israelites in slavery. God had heard their cries. God knew their suffering. In other words, God was there as a witness before God acted. Scripture tells us at some point where he's talking to Moses and later on the Israelites, I am the God of your father, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why that statement was so important is because that statement recovered memory. Egypt had told the Israelites, you were just slaves. You have no identity. You have no value. What this statement says that God not only remembered Israel, but had a relationship with them. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's recovering memory, recovering from where Israel's had come. And then God, of course, reveals his divine name. I am who I am. Reauthors meaning. God is reauthoring meaning. And that is important because reauthoring meaning is a part of identity repair. So, the 8 steps of healthy identity reformation. The first one is witness. Witness. Someone actually sees you, hears you, understands you without flinching. Healing begins when suffering is seen and not explained. Healing begins when suffering is not minimized, not spiritualized, not fixed on too quickly. God says, I have seen you, I've heard you, I've known you. Before anything changes, you are witnessed. And that's important. The biggest need that I've done, and a lot of times the biggest human need from a lot of my therapeutic work, is human beings want to be seen, heard, and understood. They want to be seen, heard, and understood. Can you see me in my suffering and not dismiss my story? Being seen accurately is so important. And I dare say that being seen accurately is actually the opposite of abuse. Number 2, counter narratives. Healthy identity reformation comes when we experience counter narratives. In other words, what we're saying is new messages from credible sources enter the story. Healing doesn't start by erasing the story, it starts by getting a valued counter narrative, by introducing another voice. It's one of the reasons that abusive systems want to isolate people, because they do not want people hearing a counter narrative so they can hear and understand their voice. A counter narrative, a second voice that says, you are not what was done to you. You are not who they said you were. You are not your worst moment. You are capable of more, especially if you try. The old message doesn't disappear immediately, but it's no longer known because a counter narrative has been introduced, something that fights the old messaging. Number 3, memory recovery. Your true history is restored. God reminded Moses and Israel who they were before slavery. That's important because when you sit in suffering for so long, you can easily forget who you are. When you constantly get bad narratives that demean your humanity, you can forget who you are. It's one of the reasons why I like to tell people that you are made in the image of God Almighty. That is important to understand. We are in the image of God. Think about understanding that you are in the image of God, I am in the image of God, and what that does as a counter narrative to someone who wants to oppress or demean our humanity. Memory recovery, your true history is restored. Your story didn't start with the wound. You come from somewhere. Memory gives identity roots. As an African American male in this country, that was important for me because many stories only wanted to start with the fact of people of African descent being in slavery in this country. They forgot about us being kings, queens, mathematicians, spiritual leaders, scientists, inventors, all of these different things that occurred while our people were in Africa, but then also have occurred while we were here in America. That is memory recovery, true history being restored. Number 4, meaning reauthoring. Meaning reauthoring simply means that we gain the right to reinterpret our own experience. This is where we can get stuck as people. Meaning shifts from I failed because I'm deficient in some way to possibly say, hey, I had to overcome obstacles that were there that weren't necessarily there for someone else because the system might have been designed a little differently. Meaning says, hey, I'm not too much. It's just that some people couldn't handle my intensity. Meaning, reauthoring doesn't deny pain, it relocates responsibility. But I also say it likes to give agency. Think about the biblical text, the story of the prodigal son. It was when the prodigal son realized that he was in the pit battling pigs for food that he said, you know what? I don't belong here. I can go back home. I don't belong here. We change the meaning, we reauthor the meaning of the story so that we can have responsibility and have agency. Number five, safe experimentation. Safe experimentation means permission to try, to fail, and to try again. I've talked about my story before. I've had parents, I had elders, I had other people at times in my life who didn't allow me to make mistakes. If I made a quote unquote mistake, it was problematic. The permission to try, to fail, and to try again is so important because that's often how we learn. That's how life teaches us. We try something, we fail, we try again, we fail, we try. We develop mastery as we do something over and over and over again. Identity strengthens through mastery. I can do this becomes I am someone who can do things. Mastery requires environments where failure is not catastrophic. Safe experimentation rebuilds confidence slowly and honestly. Number six, talked about this earlier, models and mentors. People who look like a possible future self. We don't need perfect role models. We just need possible ones. If they can live whole, maybe I can too. If they can get out of this tough situation, maybe I can too. If they can graduate from this school, maybe I can too. If they can be successful in whatever field they say, then maybe I can too. Possible role models that give us vision on places we can actually go. And number seven, membership and life-giving community. Membership and life-giving community. Healthy community does not ask us to shrink ourselves. Healthy community allows us to grow. Healthy community builds something in us. Healthy community wants us to flourish and to be all that God would have us to be. And here's the truth. Identity does come in community because we are not designed to live this life alone, but it's in community that we grow. So the question is, what kind of community is forming you? What kind of community is forming you? Number eight, commissioning. We are sent for something meaningful. What that simply means is that the healing that goes on inside and the reforming of identity and the healing that comes eventually turns outward because we are called to do something with our healing. It's one of the reasons why I do work with spiritual trauma. It's one of the reasons that I do work helping married couples. Part of my story is I'm a child of a broken marriage. My parents divorced when I was 5. Part of my story is that I've sat in abusive religious systems and I've worked with people in abusive religious systems and saw how harm could come. But I've also been in religious systems that showed how healing could come. So, what I'm just saying is that our healing eventually turns outward because we are giving something to do that only we can do. Another way of saying it is you're needed and your gifts matter. It doesn't matter if you're a little different. That means you're just called to reach someone differently than the other person is. We are healing from something so we can be formed into something. Moses says, "Who am I?" God doesn't answer with a resume. God instead answers with presence. I will be with you. Identity is not rebuilt in isolation. It is rebuilt in relationship. So here's the question I want to leave with you today. Who has been a witness for you? Someone who saw you accurately when you couldn't see yourself. Question number 2. Who might need you to be that witness for them? This is William Hemphill, thanking you for joining me today. I hope this has been a blessing to you and it helps you to reform into the person that God would have you be and God to have each of us to be. If you want to know more about working with me, you can go to admin1 at faithandfamilyempowerment.com. I have a book called The Confidence Walk, theconfidencewalk.net. Please feel free to pick it up and read it. And if this video has been a blessing with you, please share it with somebody else so they can receive and be blessed also. And as we close, just want to leave you with this. Love God, love people, and love yourself. Take care. God bless you. Have a wonderful week.